It all started like a dream for Di at just 15. She was the talk of her classmates in SS1. Dora, as everyone called her, was beautiful and full of life. She lived with her mother in a small apartment. Her mother worked as a petty trader selling provisions in the market. Life was hard, but Dora never really felt it because her mother did her best in providing for her as an only child. But everything changed when Dora met Desmond. Desmond was 17 and lived in the neighborhood. He was tall, dark, and handsome, with a charm that could mend anyone's heart. He dressed in flashy clothes, always had the latest gadgets, and drove his sleek black car that made heads team. It didn't take long for Dora to fall for him. He was sweet to her, always showering her with compliments and gifts. At first, Dora couldn't believe her luck. How could someone like Desmond love me? She would ask in silence. Desmond was a big boy, known in the era for his flashy lifestyle. People whispered that he was into Yahoo, but Dora didn't care. He treated her like a queen. He bought her clothes, expensive shoes, and even the latest iPhone. Dora was living the kind of life she only saw in Hollywood movies. Whenever T gave her money, she will share some with her mother. Mama used this money to buy things for the house, she will say. Her mother never really asked any questions. She simply accepted the morning with a smile. My daughter, God will bless you, she will say. She never scared her or remind her that she was too young for the kind of life she was leaving. In fact, she always encouraged her to go out with Desmond so she could return home. With enough money, Desmond took Dora to the best places in town. They went to fancy restaurants and clubs, places Dora never thought she would see. Her friends in school were jealous, always asking how she managed to get such a rich boyfriend. Dora felt like a celebrity. But then, the thing happened. One Saturday morning, as Dora was preparing to visit Desmond, she heard a loud knock on their door. She opened it and saw a little boy telling her in a hurry to come quick, that Dazan was in trouble. Reaching Dazan's place, she saw a group of men in black jackets dragging Dazan away from his house. They were shouting, "ECC, boy, boy, criminal." Dee froze, her heart raced as she watched them shove Dazan into their van and drove away. For this, Dora couldn't eat or sleep. She kept calling DMA's number, but it wasn't going through. She was worried, confused, and scared. She wanted to tell her mother, but something held her back. She didn't want her mother to know about Dez's arrest. A few weeks later, Dora began to feel sick. She vomited in the morning. I felt tired all the time. Her uniform no longer fit her, and her friends started whispering behind her back. It wasn't long before she realized the truth. She was pregnant when she finally told her mother. Her mother was furious. "Pregnant at your age? Who's responsible?" she shouted. "Is this him?" Dora stammered, tears streaming down her face. Mama's DA's face turned red with anger. "You mean that boy?" they said. "They arrested. I had wanted to hear it from your mouth that he was arrested. And when I didn't, I thought it was all a lie. You let him spoil your life like this. You are a disgrace. Dora, pack your things and leave my house. I don't want to see you again. Other people's children are doing it smartly, but you opened your legs and allowed yourself to get pregnant. This way, leave my house this very minute." Dora begged and pleaded, but Mama Dora wouldn't listen. She was ashamed and broken. The neighbors gathered outside gossiping and shaking their heads. Dora had no choice but to leave with nowhere else to go. She decided to find Dez's elder sister in Kitchen. She had met Inan once when Tone introduced her as his babe. Inan lived in a 2-room apartment in another part of the town. When Dora arrived, she explained everything. Inchin let her stay, but things quickly turned S-Uni. She was harsh and impatient, always complaining about Dora being a burden. "You think life is easy? Do you know how hard I worked to pay my rent in Kiwase?" One evening she told Dora, "If you want to stay here, you must work. I know people who can help you make money." That night she took Dora to a bar and introduced her to a woman named Mama Gold. Mama Gold was the owner of a brothel. At first, Dora refused. "I can't do this," she cried. But B-Key was relentless. "Do you want to sleep in the streets? You are pregnant and useless. At least make yourself useful," with no other option. Dora gave in. She started working for Mama Gold, meeting strange men every night. She hated herself, but she had to survive. She didn't know how she would raise a baby, but she promised herself she would find a way. 9 months passed in misery. Dora's belly grew larger. The mess stopped coming. Nobody wanted a pregnant girl. Mama Go began to lose patience with her and didn't care either. Dora was alone and scared. The day Dora went into labor was the worst day of her life. She was in pain and had no one to hold her hand. Mama God called the local midwife, and after hours of agony, Dee gave birth to a baby girl. But instead of feeling joy, she felt anger and shame. She couldn't even bring herself to look at her own child that night when everyone was asleep. carried the baby in her arms and walked to the well behind the brutal. Tears rolled down her face as she whispered, "I am sorry." Without another thought, she let go, throwing the baby into it. The baby's cry echoed in the darkness before silence swallowed it. Dora walked out trembling, her hands shaking. The weight of her actions crushed her spirits. She felt no relief, only emptiness. That night, sleep was very far from her. Her mind raced, her heart pounded, and her body shook with fear and guilt. She couldn't stay at the brothel any longer. Mama Gold and the other women would soon discover what she had done. She knew they would not forgive her. Before dawn, Dora packed the little she had, a tattered bag with a few clothes and the last morning she had aimed. Quietly, she slipped out of the brothel, her steps light but hurried. The streets were still dark and the cool early morning breeze chilled her skin. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but she knew she had to leave as she walked. Dora thought of a maternal village. The last time she was there was when she was just 8 years old. Her mother had been alive then, and the house had been full of life, but things were different now. Her grandmother had passed away years ago, and her grandfather shortly after. Dora's mother had stopped taking her to the village, and they really spoke about it, but it was the only place she could think of. She hoped that someone from her family would still be there. Back at the brothel, money came, and the women began their usual routine. It wasn't until someone went to fetch water from the well that the horrible discovery was made. There was something in the well. The guests screamed, dropping the buckets. Stepping back in shock, the others rushed to see what was happening. They peeped into the well and saw the small, lifeless body floating on the surface. Gasps and cries filled the air. Some of the women broke down with ears, their voice shaking with disbelief and sorrow. How could someone do this? One of them wept. Mama Gold was furious. Who's responsible for this? Who would do this to an innocent child? She shouted, her face red with anger. It didn't take long for them to realize that Dora was missing. It must be her, one of the women said. She was pregnant. Now she's gone. The midwife who had helped Dora deliver the baby shook her head sadly. That girl was troubled, but I never thought she would do something like this. They brought the baby out too. They tried to move on. The tragedy lingered in the air, leaving everyone shaking. Dora kept walking, itching RS where she could. The journey to her maternal village was long and tiring. She hadn't eaten and her BDF weak, but she pressed on, driven by a mist of fear, shame, and desperation. When she finally reached the village, it was almost evening. The familiar sight of the dusty roads and the clusters of houses brought back memories of her childhood. She walked through the narrow paths, her heart heavy with uncertainty. What if no one remembered her? What if they turned her away? Eventually, she reached her little grandmother's house. He stood at the edge of the village, surrounded by overgrown bushes. The house looked smaller than she remembered, and the walls were cracked and faded. She knocked on the wooden door, a hen trembling. After a few moments, an elderly woman opened it. She stared at Dora for a long time before her face lit up with recognition. "Dora, is this really you?" the woman asked. "Yes, ma," Dora said, her voice barely a whisper. The woman, who was a distant relative, "Welcome. That inside your grandmother's room is still the way she left it. You can stay there," she said, kindly. Dora was shown to her late grandmother's room, a small, poly little space with an old bed and a wooden chest. The air was musty and cobwebs clung to the corners, but it was a place to rest. The D sat on the bed and let out a long sigh. For the first time in days, she felt a small sense of relief. The relatives who lived nearby brought her food and water. They didn't ask too many questions, though she could tell they were curious about why she had come. Dora gave them vague answers, saying she had come to the village to rest and think about her life. The next day, some of the older women in the village visited her. They remembered her as the cheerful little girl who used to visit with her mother. "You have grown so much," one of them said. "What happened to your mother? Why did she come with you?" Dora avoided your questions, nodding, smiling. Polly, she couldn't bring herself to tell them the truth, despite the kindness of her relatives. Dora shake the guilt that consumed her every night. She replaced the moment she let go of her baby. The image of the tiny, lifeless body haunted her dreams. She wake up in the middle of the night, dread and sweat, her heart racing during the day. She tried to keep busy. She helped her relatives fresh water, cook and clean. She also visited the village church, sitting at the back and listening to the choir. But no matter what she did, the weight of our actions followed her like a shadow. It wasn't long before we began to spread in the village. Some of the older women noticed how withdrawn Dora was. "She's hiding something," one of them said. "There is sadness in her eyes. She looks like a mother, but where is our baby?" Others speculated about her sudden appearance. someone dug deeper into her past. Though she had found temporal refuge in the village, she knew she couldn't stay there forever. Her relatives were kind, they had their own struggles. She didn't want to become a burden one day as she was sleeping. The compound, an older man approached her, introduced himself as one of her late grandfather's friends. "I knew your grandparents well," he said. "If you need any help, let me know." Dora teagued, though. She wasn't sure what kind of help she needed. All she knew was that life was in chambers, and she had no idea how to fix it. The days in the village passed slowly for Dora. She tried to settle in, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't forget the past. Her grandmother's house was peaceful, but her mind was always troubled. The shame of what she had done and the fear of what will happiness made her restless. One morning as she was sitting outside, lost in thought, the elderly man, her grandfather's friend, approached her. His gray bed neatly trimmed, he carried a small bag in one hand and a walking stick in the other. His presence was commanding, and even though he was old, he still looked very young. "Dora, my child," he greeted warmly, his deep voice carrying authority. Dora looked up at him. She recognized him as one of her late grandfather's friends who came visiting the other time she had seen him. A few times too, when she was younger, but she didn't remember his name. "Your grandfather and I were like brothers. I thought to come and see you because I hadn't been here since the last time." Dora tried to smile. "Thank you, sir." He sat on a small wooden stove beside her. "I brought you some food," he said, handing out the small bag. Dora hesitated before taking it. When she opened it, she saw fresh, ease-dried fish and "Thank you so much," she said sincerely. It had been a while since someone, a man, gave her anything without expecting something in return. The man chuckled. "Don't thank me too much yet. I will be visiting off," he said, winking playfully. True to his word, he started coming to see her almost every day. He always brought something, sometimes fruits, sometimes meats, and other times money. At first, Dora didn't think much of it. She was just grateful for his kindness. But soon people in the village began to gossip. "Why is that old man always visiting Dora?" Some women whispered, "Can't you see he likes her now?" Another one added. Dora tried to ignore the rumors, but they spread so fast. One afternoon, one of the women in the village, Minji, pulled her aside. "My daughter, be careful with that man," she warned. "He's old enough to be your father, and he likes women too much." Many young girls had fallen into his trap. Dora noted, but didn't say anything. She was already dealing with too much, and she didn't want more trouble. A few days later, the man finally said what had been on his mind. "Dora," he said, as they sat outside under the shade of a big tree, "I have been thinking about you a lot. You are a fine young woman, and I know life has not been easy for you." Dora lowered her gaze. She had the feeling she knew where he was going. "I like you, Dora," he continued. "I want you to be my wife." Dora's heart kicked a bit. She stared at him, unsure of what to say. He was old. Too old for her. The thought of being with him made her uncomfortable. I don't know what to say," she finally murmured. "Think about it," he said gently. "I will take care of you. You will never suffer again." That night, Dora laid in bed, thinking the idea of marrying an old man was disturbing. But she was chess. Because she had no money, no future, and nowhere else to go. She was tired of struggling, and just maybe this was her only way out. The next day, she gave him an answer. "I would think about it," she said. The man smiled, pleased with her response, although she hadn't said yes, but he took it as a good sign. He started treating her like his wife, and before she knew it, she had moved into his house. But life in his house was not easy. The man had children, grown children, who did not approve of her presence. Every day they fought with her. "You think you can come here and take her father's property?" one of them shouted at her. "You are just a goat digger. Go back to where you came from," another one. Dora tried to ignore them, but it was hard. They made her life miserable. Sometimes they refused to let her eat from the family board. Other times they would insult her in front of visitors. The old man, however, didn't seem to care. He continued trying Dora well, buying her gifts and defending her where his children attacked her one evening. As Dora sat outside, one of the village women rushed towards her. "Dora, have you heard?" the woman asked breathlessly. "Heard what?" Dora asked, confused. "Your mother knows you are here." Dora's hearts pounded. "How news reach her in the city that you were living with an old man?" The woman said, "She's coming for you. She's already on her way." Dora felt her whole body go cold. She had not seen her mother since the day she threw her out. What will happen now? Will her mother take her back, or will she disgrace her even more? Her heart pounded as she sat outside the old man's house, her hands tightly clasped together. She was restless, her eyes dating to the road every few minutes. The thought of facing her mother again after everything that had happened sent shush down her spine. Would Mama forgive me? Would she still be angry? Will she take me back or disgrace me in front of the whole village? She couldn't sit still. She stood a PA around the yard and then sat again. The old man who had been watching her finally spoke. Dora, why are you so restless? He asked, placing his hands on his knees. She swallowed hard before answering. Someone told me. My mother is coming, she said in a shaky voice. The old man's face lit up with excitement. Ah, that's a good news. I will finally get to meet my in-law. Dee looked at him confused. Why will you be happy? You don't even understand the kind of trouble that is coming. You have no idea how angry my mother will be. As the min passed, Dora's anxiety grew. She kept looking towards the road, expecting to see her mother appear at any moment. And then suddenly she saw a familiar figure storming towards the house. It was her mother. Dora's heart nearly stopped. Her mother's face was twisted in anger, her steps quick, and then her face was twisted in anger. Her steps quick, forceful. She didn't stop to greet anyone. She didn't ask for directions. She walked straight to the house as if she had lived there all her life. Dora jumped to her feet, her entire body trembling before she could say anything. Her mother reached her, grabbed her wrist, and yanked her forward. You useless girl, she shouted, her voice filled with rage. Without warning, she raised her hand and slapped Dora across her face. The sound echoed in the compound. Dora's eyes wet up with tears. Mama, please. Before she could finish, another slap landed on her cheek. You left the city to come and stay with an old man. You disgrace me everywhere you go. The old man quickly stood up from his chair. In-law, please calm down, he said, reaching out to stop her. But Mama Dora turned sharply and pushed him backward with surprising strength. Don't touch me, and don't you dare call me your in-law again. Is this the man you want to marry? A man older than your father? She yelled at Dora, her chest rising and falling with each breath. Dora was too scared to say a word. She wanted to explain, to tell her mother that she had nowhere else to go, but she knew it wouldn't make a difference. The villagers had gathered by now, watching the scene unfold. Some whispered to each other, others shook their heads. Mama Dora didn't care. She yanked Dora forward again. We are leaving this place now. Dora didn't resist. She knew better than to argue with her mother. With her head down, she allowed herself to be dragged away. The old man stood deaf, turned watching them leave. He had thought Dora would be his wife, but now she was being taken away before his eyes. The journey back to the city was silent. Medora didn't speak a word to her daughter, and Dora didn't dare open her mouth either. She simply sat in the bus, staring at the window with tears rolling down her cheeks. When they finally got home, her mother made it clear that things will never be the same again. You will go back to school, she said firmly. I will enroll you in a public school. No more running around with men, no more shame. Dora nodded quietly. She wanted to be happy about going back to school, but something inside her felt broken. A week later, she started at a new school. The students were different from the ones in our previous school. They were not interested in fancy things. They didn't ask about rich boyfriends or expensive phones. They only cared about school. But the real problem wasn't the school. The real problem was home. Her mother had taken her back, yes, but the love was no longer there. She no longer treated Dora like her beloved daughter. She barely spoke to her unless it was necessary. She didn't see her. She didn't praise her either. She acted as if Dora was a stranger in her own home. Dora felt it every day. The silence, the coldness, and the distance. One evening, as they sat outside, she finally gathered the courage to speak. Mama Dora said softly, "Are you ever going to forgive me?" Mama Dora sighed deeply. "Dora, do you know what you did to me? Do you know how much shame you brought to this family?" Tears filled Dee's eyes.